Welcome to the Diary of a Change Manager, the podcast that makes change management easy.
So good morning and welcome to the Diary of a Change Manager. I'm Sam, your host, and today I'm talking to Jack.
Thank you, Sam.
Are you going to introduce yourself?
Yes, so I'm Jack, and we first met quite a while ago now.
6 years? 6 years?
I want to say 2017, possibly. And we met in a government basement.
Yeah.
It had a sound strange. It was raining.
Much like today.
Yeah, very much so.
You were so smart when you walked in with your very, very lovely long umbrella. I love a long umbrella.
Yeah.
It's very impressive.
Welcome. Yeah, it's quite gentleman-like, I think.
Yeah.
So, I think it's probably my grand. So we met quite a while ago now, and we've done lots together, haven't we?
We have indeed. So today we're here to talk all about stakeholder management and champions networks. So my first question to you, Jack, is what makes you so passionate about people and the impact that they have on the success of a change program?
So I think the thing for me, Sam, is when it comes to stakeholders in a change program or project, we know it's people that make that change happen and to continue the longevity of whatever the change is. Doesn't matter what the tech looks like or the change in, it could be the way you make a tea that they're asked to do, or, implementing some form of technology. If people are not bought into it and they don't come with you, that change is going to struggle to happen. It certainly won't carry on.
Yeah.
So for me, that stakeholder management part of our change manager role, for me is just so important. People are at the end of a change, and we know it's painful.
We do.
You can't dress that up anyway. So we need to be aware of that. And for me, that's why I'm so passionate about, stakeholder management and the groups that are affected by change.
Yeah. So how do you figure out who's important?
It's difficult. It's difficult. That it's a real challenge to sometimes unearth, the different stakeholder groups. So if I think back to my time in the NHS, there are so many different stakeholders that would have been affected by a particular change that we were working on. And this goes, right from CEO through to the janitors, and we needed to establish quite quickly, where that level of impact was going to hit them with the change, and make a plan around that. So it's really about getting in the offices and the spaces and understanding sort of an organisation's landscape, and matching that with the project's ambitions.
So I seem to remember, Jack, that you've got a particular set of stakeholders that they're your number one go-to. So can you remind me who that is?
So for me, the go-tos are the people managers. It's the middle level of management. So there's often quite a lot of focus, and we do this initially, I feel, within change management and projects and programs, is we go straight for the senior stakeholders, don't we? The sponsors, they're going to be almost the leaders of that change. And they are really, really important. And we'll probably talk a bit more about those in a second. And then you've got sort of the people on the ground, the workers, who are really going to be affected by the change. That's their living, their day-to-day, activities that are going to change. So for me, I like to try and be involved with those people managers, the people that are looking after, involved with the people that are really going to be affected by the change. So that's what I look to kind of go after to a certain extent. It may be the wrong choice of words, but it's unearthing those people managers.
Yeah. And is there something about the fact that they give their teams permission to spend the time to find out? They give them permission to learn. So can you open up a bit more on that?
Of course, yeah. So I've found that if you miss that level, or if you miss out the people management and they're not involved with us as change managers in a project or a program, we find that, reaching and getting messages to the people that are affected is really difficult. We can also find that level of management, because, they're getting pressure from below, pressure from above.
Yeah.
So it's really about supporting them, and they can become sort of the underground behaviour where they'll say yes to you, but they're not really invested, and they're not going to give us the route to the actual people that are going to be affected by change. So it's really about trying to bring them on board, and establish where their pain points are, and they've got a lot, and you need to listen to them. We need to listen.
Yeah. So how do you do that?
For me, when I've done this, especially in the NHS, I found that kind of just having conversations, it can sometimes be, an organised formal conversation, but sometimes, meeting them in, the coffee corner, water coolers, whatever it is, it's having those early, consistent dialogues, building a relationship, which I think is such a big part of our job as change managers. We need to be able to build relationships with the right people. You need to move for all of us with change, you're in a state of fear when change comes around, and we need to move them from that state of fear to a state of trust, and they have to trust in us as change managers. We need to understand their pain. Sometimes we might need to do some favours for them. They might not be very heard, so we might be able to take what they're saying to us back to senior level leadership and kind of unblock some barriers for them. And then they'll open up to us and say, okay, I'll let you into our team meetings, Jack. Or I'll let you, send a particular comms to a particular niche group. They really hold all the keys for me to get into the people that are going to be affected by change.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely you're right there, Jack. So talk a bit about the senior leadership then. So what role do they play?
So a lot of the time, the senior leadership, we kind of tag them straight away with this sponsor. You're the ones that are going to talk about the change. You're going to say how great it is.
Yeah.
So it's really key to get their buy-in, obviously, and you'd hope that they are. The thing that sometimes falls a little bit short, and there's lots of pressures on everybody at work, is kind of talking the talk, walking the walk as well.
Yeah.
We really want to help those senior leaders with the change. So say we're implementing a technology, we would, sometimes give them a bit of a white glove service to make sure that they've got all the tools and training and everything they need to adopt that change that's coming on. And then I would try and get as much time with them as possible, which is going to be difficult.
Of course, yeah.
And look to do a bit of coaching and see if we can help them with communicating the change and really showing, because words are great, but actions are even stronger. So getting them to show that they're embracing the change that's coming and what they're doing, what their change journey looks like, can be really powerful as well.
Yeah, so it's about influencing them, isn't it, to be advocates and to really be championing this change for us.
Yeah, influencing is kind of like a unwritten part of our job description, isn't it? Influencing all of our stakeholders or communities and groups is really important when it comes to change management. It's like a bit of a dark art, but sometimes just talking, a bit of empathy goes a long way. Being understanding of all of the different roles that and being cognizant of how that change and this change process affects them. All these extra meetings that are coming out, the comms that are landing in inboxes or in their teams or networking channels. So it's really sort of having a bit of empathy and doing change with them rather than to them, which is so often the way I've had that previously, which made me want to become a change manager.
So come on, tell us about that experience. Come on.
So I was working in the NHS as a data quality officer,
right.
Looking after the medical records. And the NHS where I was working, the trust, were implementing a new system. And it was just done to us. There was no real build-up. I couldn't think of anybody in particular that if I had a problem that I'd go and talk to. It was literally, here's your training, here's your manual, from Monday, all the best. Pat on the back and off you go. And then that's really daunting. It's scary, but at times you've got to be able to do your job still. And I just thought at the time that there are better ways of doing this.
Yeah.
So I got involved quite quickly in IT training and then change management, and started to understand a bit more about change management and the psychology of change. That really sort of is important to me.
Yeah. So let's circle back round to what you said about in that situation that you couldn't find anyone that could help you on Monday morning. So I think that brings us, doesn't it, really nicely actually back to that other really important group of people when we're talking about stakeholders and champions.
Yeah.
Where do we find those people? How do we find them, Jack? And how do we get them on board with our programs?
Yeah, so champions, champions programs for me are just so important. And this is really investing in the people that are going to be going through the change. It's not bringing in people from the outside. It's the people on the ground that are advocates of what's going on. So they're and those that hold a bit of influence at times, within their peer groups. It's getting them on board and say, do you want to be part of this with us?
Yeah.
You can really be a strong player in helping you and your colleagues move to a new state or go through this change.
How do we spot them?
How do we spot them?
I
tell you how I've spotted them before.
Yeah.
They're often the ones that are telling me, no, this is not good. Because they're the strongest voices.
Yeah.
And it's human nature. If someone says, Sam, you can't do that anymore, you're going to do something different.
Yeah.
No way, Jack. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And those that speak up are quite often the really strong, powerful personalities that hold a lot of gravitas amongst their peers, and they'll be looked to. So you quite often find, it's not always the case, but I've found it in government and in the NHS where I've worked previously, that some of our naysayers that voice their opinions straight away often just need to be listened to, given the information that they need, and they turn around really quickly to be your strongest advocates and champions.
Yeah.
And they are already influencers of their peers, and they bring people with them.
Yeah.
So I find that quite quickly you can establish those that are going to be really good to have on your team as sort of in that champion, informal or formal network.
Yeah. And there's something else, isn't there, about the person you already go to for that support.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple in our business, haven't we? We always go to the same people when you want to learn about something new, because they're just the ones that know it. They're the ones that are really interested already. Yeah. So how do you spot those ones?
Again, I think it's talking to that middle management. Yeah. So we've spoke about them before, the leaders of people. And if we strike up that relationship with that group of people, that the people leaders, they'll quite often say that, Sam's kind of our go-to IT person, or Sam always fixes the printer when it gets jammed. Well, that wouldn't be me. But there are those people that are just your go-tos. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've found that we've got that a lot of time from the middle management. When we've done this previously, when we did some work in the government, we kind of had an all doors open, but kind of set some criteria for people as well to say, is this a good match for you? Sign up. And sometimes you have to give something back. Could be cake. That's a good influence.
Everyone loves a bit of cake, Jack.
So that is often how I find those champions. Whether you can do a formal come and join us, and people offer their own autonomy and will want to come and join and be part of something to help with this change that's coming. Yeah. Or sometimes it's just unearthing those people that are the go-tos.
Yeah. I remember that particular project, Jack, when we first met. And I seem to remember that you came on board to manage those stakeholder groups. And we were so successful on that programme because I think, wasn't it the PermSec that came and did was it a rewards? It was a ceremony at the end of the programme. Yeah. And many of those people had never met the PermSec before, and they were absolutely blown away with that, weren't they?
It's really powerful. I think that recognition and reward for those networks that are helping in, big change that are going on. You think how busy we all are. You've just signed up to be a champion. We would offer, lots of different benefits to being a champion, but the biggest thing that they're going to get is they're going to be, at the forefront of this change. They're going to be armed with all of the information, get sneak peeks of things that are coming, be the first to know, and they'll be able to support their peers. That's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot for people to do. So giving some reward and recognition from somebody of that stature, that's huge. And, that's only going to help with encouraging them to do more of the same thing, to be that champion, and to be part of, whatever the new thing is coming along. But reward and recognition is huge when it comes to these networks, because everything's additional, right? We're all consumed by our day-to-day, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, yeah. So I know now that we sort of tend to go to those management and to the sort of senior leaders and say, if we want to make this Champions programme work, we've got to let them carve out some time.
Yeah.
And how are you finding that now? Are senior leaders more open to having that kind of conversation?
I think they are. I think we're always going to get a bit of pushback because there's a certain level of investment with any change.
Yeah.
But I think where we've worked, we've kind of explained to the sponsors and that senior leadership how important these networks are and what benefits they can give you by having, people from your own business and company to be able to champion the change. Nobody knows who Jack is. They'll listen to me, but they won't take it with the same importance as they would do their peer.
Yeah.
So when we've been able to show that benefit and to talk, those senior leaders through the benefits of having champions, we do find that they're more open to that. They carve out the time for them. They give people the recognition and reward. And sometimes it's even built into some of corporate objectives and helps them with their progression in their career, whether it's, civil service or NHS or wherever they're working. So that's really powerful to do.
Yeah, no, I think so. So thinking about all of your experiences, Jack, over the last few years, can you give us any really great examples of where this hasn't gone so well and how we've had to circle back and you go and restart influencing people again because something's gone wrong? Have you got any ideas there?
There's one that sticks in my mind. It takes me back to the NHS again.
Yeah.
And this is where we're implementing a new healthcare record system. So our clinical staff had to enter, just taking observations, blood pressure, temperature, etc. It would have to go into an electronic system.
Yeah.
So this is quite a few years ago now. And as we were going through the change programme, the ward management, who are in charge of rotating and giving direction to those staff nurses, auxiliary nurses, senior sisters, and that stakeholder group just wasn't invested in. And we found that quite quickly, as we were supporting over a go live, there wasn't much live happening. Pieces of paper were still going around. There was a lot of floor walking support. There were all of the tick box exercises from the project and program, I would say, were done, but that level of management just really wasn't given enough opportunity to hear their concerns and problems. So we noticed quite quickly the level of adoption wasn't great.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of go back over that, try and re-engage with, and you can imagine this change has already happened.
Yeah.
So they're all already disengaged, already standoffish. They don't want to talk to Jack. They don't want to talk to anyone else from the project.
Yeah.
The really high-level sponsor messaging is good, but it's just another thing that's coming down onto this level of management. So we had to try and carve out time, go back, listen to concerns, address them. There was additional training that we had to do. And when we think of that in a project scenario, that's time, cost. And the biggest thing for me was the people. These people were just not given enough time. We know that people are the most important thing when it comes to change. And if you don't do it properly right from the very beginning, my experience, especially there, is we fall really short and we fail people.
Yeah.
which is it doesn't leave a good taste in anybody's mouth, and the project will really struggle.
Yeah. And ultimately, in that context, they were the front line, weren't they? They were the people that are actually, they're the ones that are having to put that information into that system. So, yeah.
And a pressurized area as well.
Yeah.
This is so important to many of us. So doing it right first time, having that people first approach is just absolutely key. And it comes right back to the start of the conversation where we were talking about identifying those stakeholder groups. At the top, brilliant for that core level messaging. The people on the ground doing the job that are going to be affected, they're going to get the highs, the lows, the stress, the benefit, the joy as well. But we really need to make sure we tap into the people managers and understand what that looks like, and take them on that journey with us. Because if you don't, it devastating results that are there for everyone to see.
Yeah.
I don't want to be too negative.
No, let's be
It's
negative.
been really good.
Yeah. So Jack, I'm thinking now about what makes a great people change manager. What are the qualities that we should be looking for in our great people change managers?
So great people change. So I think part of it's in your question. It's people. So people and people. For me, it's empathy, having a real understanding that change is difficult. It's hard.
Yeah.
There are going to be lows. There are going to be highs. And for me to be the best version of myself as a change manager, it's just having that empathy, being able to talk to, CEO, director, chairman, whoever it is, and then also being able to talk to the people on the front line, the boots on the ground, those that are doing the work.
Yeah.
We need to be able to make sure that we can communicate effectively to all of them and be engaged with them. I think that's really important. So empathy, people first approach to everything, and really listen, which is a skill. I talk a lot, but I have to learn to, we have to learn to listen and really take on board what they're saying to us. But sometimes I won't say it verbally. You can feel that they're disengaged, stressed, they're worried, and there's a lot about our jobs and responsibilities as a change manager.
I often say we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It is.
Got to listen.
Yeah, it's very important. Is there anything else that makes a great change manager? Being adaptable. Being adaptable. We've all read the manuals, gone through training as change managers, but I think you can quite quickly establish if you need to do a little bit more in some areas, and being adaptable and being able to change your tactics. Because not everybody's the same. And again, this is why I feel so strongly about people side of change. Understanding, put people in a stressful situation. There's 2 responses to, fight or flight. And we need to be really conscious of that, and give people what they need. Sometimes it is cake, Sam, or
sometimes
whatever it is, biscuits. Tea and biscuits work really well. Just to break that, I'm the change manager coming in, and let's talk about this new thing that's coming. Let's try and get a relationship first.
So it's about being human, isn't it? And just having that chat with people, rather than making it really formal. And,
which we do because we work in this sort of quite a structured project delivery of change sometimes, and you're spot on. It's having that different way of just coming round to it. I think it's really important.
So Jack, I remember that program that we've originally worked on together. It was for a big government department, and there was quite a lot of concern very early on about one specific community within that organisation. So can you expand on what you did about that and how we engage with that community? Yeah,
of course. So we were made aware quite early that there are a few communities, but the one in particular that you reference for adaptive technology or assisted technology for, people that needed a little bit more technical support. And what do we mean by that? So those that had, as an example, like a visual impairment, and they would need additional software or hardware to support them. So what we did is we employed a change manager specifically for that community. And it was no easy task because we didn't know how many people were in this community. We didn't know where they were. So it was a real task to make sure that we were inclusive of that community. We gave them an opportunity to talk to us, and we were able to support them in the ways that they needed. We'd learnt previously, I think, didn't we, that, you know, this particular community were kind of often either ignored or not spoken to at relevant stages. So, you know, it felt so important to us to make sure we gave that real priority.
I think we'd been made aware, hadn't we, that in previous change programs, this community had been left to the end. You know, their needs had not been taken into consideration. And as a result, particularly in this particular government department, there was quite a large community, and it had a very negative impact on previous programs. So that was why we prioritised it, wasn't it?
And you think how important that was in the larger scheme of ensuring that we were able to support that community, especially being sort of forewarned that this was a real impact and had a bad history before. So I know that our change manager had to overcome a lot of sort of maybe negativity, scepticism, quite possibly to begin with, because this has not been done before. We're always last on the list. But now they've got, you know, that dedicated change manager in that space to help them. It was really important.
I remember the relationship that she built with that community. It was absolutely wonderful. And actually, here we are several years later, and she's still there.
That says everything.
It certainly does.
Really, really fundamental core delivery, really, for that group.
It's very heartwarming, actually.
Totally.
Well, Jack, it's been absolutely great speaking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on the Diary of a Change
Thank you
Manager.
for having me.
Very welcome.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks for joining us on this episode. You can catch our other expert talks and useful change resources by visiting theinformedteam.com/podcast. Until next time.